Hola amigos. So today we're going to go over four irregular verbs in the preterite. Now these verbs are, we have a lot of irregular verbs in the preterite, but these four really don't fit any of the other good categories. So I just usually refer to them as the four irregulars, los cuatro irregulares, because they're not stem changing verbs, they're not morphing verbs. They just kind of follow their own rules. Now with ver is going to be, it's barely irregular. It's a little bit, it's got sort of a predictable pattern, but just a little bit different. Dar is pretty weird. It's very similar to ver, so I'm going to kind of group these two together. And ir and ser, we're going to kind of be fortunate in that they're the same conjugation. But it's a pretty weird verb. It's a pretty weird conjugation. It's pretty unpredictable, and but at least we get two conjugations out of it. So I'll get to that in just a minute. Let me start with ver because that one's probably the easiest. So if you're conjugating an er verb, you know, these are the endings we want to use, right? Iste, yo, imos, istes, dieron. That is what we'd expect to use. This is just copied right from our regular verb notes. And ver is an er verb, so this is what you'd expect. So, you know, typical process, you get rid of the er, and what we're left with is just this letter V. That is our stem. And that is true. That is exactly what we're going to do here. We're just going to add, we have the V in front of that. We put the V right there, and the V right there, the V, and the V, and the V. So if we follow the rules, we'll actually be pretty close. But the problem is, when we have these accent marks at the end of regular verbs, that's where the stressed syllable is supposed to be. But we don't need the accent mark to tell us to stress that syllable because there's only one. So that is all I essentially did here. Was I took our er verbs, which is what we should do, and I just conjugated it like regular, just no accent marks. So here, that's where we end up. So it's a slightly irregular, and that we are just going to conjugate according to, again, I got a chart already filled up better for this. We're just conjugating like an er verb, and we are using our regular er endings, except no accent marks. V is the stem, which is what you'd expect it to be. All right, so there's ver. Very common to use this in the preterite. I saw, you know, viste, did you see? Yo vimos, just we saw this. It's just a really, you know, completed action in the past. It's going to be ver is used very often like this. Now, dar, again, I group it with ver, as I said before, because it's essentially the same thing, except our stem is a D instead of a V. So here's my conjugation of that. Now, what you'll notice is that it is an AR verb. Dar is an AR verb, and that should have different endings. AR verbs are different than ER verbs, of course. So to have us use the same endings as what we just used with ver is weird. It's very irregular. So, but it's not that difficult. If you understand ver, you should understand dar. You just got to remember that dar, even though it is an AR verb, it's conjugated just like ver is, just like an ER or an IR verb, in which we still have the iste, yo, imos, istes, dieron endings. And like ver, because there's only one syllable to that first and third person singular conjugation, right there, there are no accent marks necessary. So, so there's that. So ver, dar, regular endings without the accent marks, and V is the stem for ver, dar is the stem for dar, and then you'll have a nice conjugation. All right. So those are two of the four. Now the next two, it's gonna be a 2-for-1 deal because they're the same conjugation, ir and ser, even though they mean different things. You know, I went, if we use this in the yo form, ir in the past, in the preterite, ser, I was, we use it in the preterite. And so they mean different things. So context is going to be important with these two to understand the difference. But let me just go ahead and show you the conjugation. Here it is. So we got fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fuisteis, fueron. So that looks pretty weird, right? I mean, we've got an I here, which we do have an I for an an IR verb and an ER verb that looks like something you might expect. Notice though there is no accent mark. Going to the 2 form, we've got iste, Okay, that is kind of what you'd expect as well. And then here we got a. Now that is not what you'd expect because that is not what we're supposed to have in the third person singular, but we do here. So it's quite irregular. We got to have an a ending right there. Now, additionally, I mean, I went right to the endings, but probably the weirdest part of this whole thing is that we've got an fu starts off the verb in all these conjugations. And that came from ir or came from ser. I don't know where it came from, but that's what we end up with. So it's pretty bizarre. But get over that. That's just what it is. We got fui. That's how you spell it. And just irregular. So this just takes some memorization. You know, when we learn some of the other structures, you know, spell changing verbs, extra accent marks, Y's in the third person, morpheme verbs. There's all sorts of, there's patterns to it. This one is just kind of random, kind of on its own. So it's just going to take some effort to make sure you know this conjugation. Now I am going to try to help you out with some things that can help keep things straight. Because one thing that happens is a lot of people mix up the third person singular with the first person singular. They flip flop them. You know, I might say yo fue instead of yo fui. And that's kind of, that happens a lot. But one thing I will point out to you, when you go to the nosotros form, if you look at it, it starts off with fui. So if you remember fuimos at least, which I think happens more often, most people can keep fuimos straight. Not many people say fuimos or anything like that. But if you remember that fui shows up in the plural form of the first person. So we've got fui and we got fuimos. We got fuimos in the nosotros form, which has fui at the beginning. When we go to the vosotros, same deal. We have fuisteis, the plural, has fuiste, the singular second person, right in front of it. It's the beginning of the verb. When we go to fueron, and this is probably the most useful of this little pattern, is that fueron starts with fue. In the third person singulars, fue. Third person plural starts off with those same three letters, fue. RON. Where that helps is it can help you remember if you know fueron, and if you can remember that it's fueron, then you should remember that it's fue in the third person. So that helps with that regard. But also on top of that, a lot of people like to add an I right there because a lot of our ER and IR verbs have an I right there. But that would be incorrect. So ir, ser, now it thinks it's incorrect. It is not, I promise. It just changed the language for the review. So ir, ser, dar, ver, like I said, I group them together a lot and I put them as the 4 irregulars. We have lots of irregulars. There are much more than 4, but these are the 4 that kind of don't fit any other category very well. Ver, not that irregular. Just remember, it's V as the stem. It uses ER endings like you'd expect, but no accent marks. Dar is just like ver, but instead of a V as the stem, it's a D as the stem, which is what you'd expect, but it's an AR verb. So the endings are not what you'd expect. Then ir and ser, pretty weird conjugation, but at least that conjugation works for both of them. So it pulls double duty. All right. Hope this helped. Hasta la próxima.